Last time we talked about quadratic equation, how to solve a certain type of quadratic equation. Today we're going to talk about the general way to solve a quadratic equation. And if you remember, quadratic equation is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, where a, b, and c are constant values, real values. And there is a formula for that to find the solution to this equation, and it's called the quadratic formula. It depends on the coefficients a, b, and c. So a and b and c are real numbers, real values. Okay, solution. This is assuming that the coefficient of x squared is not 0. If it is 0, then this term is gone and it will become a linear equation. Quadratic formula is we assume that this a is not 0. This way, when you look at the solution, the denominator cannot be 0. It should be a well-defined fraction. So the solution to quadratic equation follows the quadratic formula, minus b, x equals minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. This is the equation, the solution to any quadratic equation. You can find it through this quadratic formula. There are a bunch of examples I wrote. We can go through them together. So first, you're given this example 2x squared minus 3x minus 1 equal to 0. And they ask you to find out what is the solution to this equation. Find out what is a, b, and c first. Coefficient of x squared is a is 2. Coefficient of x is b is negative 3. And the constant, c, is negative 1. And now you can replace it in the quadratic formula. What is x? X becomes negative b, so it is plus 3. Negative b is already negative 3, so negative 3 becomes positive 3. Plus or minus square root of b squared, negative 3 squared is 9. Maybe I should write this once, at least. Negative 3 squared, use parentheses, otherwise you're making a mistake of just squaring the 3. Minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 1. Try to use the small parentheses, and all divided by 2 times a, which is 2. Okay, let's simplify it. Let me erase that arrow. Okay. What does x become? X becomes 3 plus or minus. I'm going to simplify underneath the square root. Negative 3 squared is 9. 4 times 2 times negative 1 is negative 8. There is another negative. So you have 9 plus 8 is 17. All divided by 2 times 2, 4. And you would see that the solution doesn't look that simple anymore. It's not like we could have factored this equation to find the solution. So this is the solution to that equation. One way is to write it like that. The other way is to say x equals 3 plus square root of 17 divided by 4. Or x equals 3 minus square root of 17 divided by 4. The way to find this quadratic formula actually is through factoring. Is creating a perfect square, but we haven't talked about that. Later we'll come back and hopefully discuss that factoring as well. So the two solutions are these two. Okay, let's look at the next example. X squared minus 2x plus 1. Well, let's find out what is a. Coefficient of x squared, which is 1. If there is nothing here, that means there is 1 times x squared. B is negative 2. C is positive 1. So what is x? X is minus b, so 2 plus or minus square root of b squared, which is 4, minus 4 times a times c. 4 times 1 times 1 is 4. All divided by 2 times a, which is 2. And this is all going through the quadratic formula. So what is x simplifies to? X is underneath the square root is 0. Square root of 0 is still 0. So you have 2 plus or minus 0 divided by 2. So the two solutions are x equals 2 plus 0 divided by 2 and 2 minus 0 divided by 2. X equals. You can simplify either one. X equals 1. And again, x equals 1. So there's only one solution set is basically one number. It's a repeated solution, but it's just one. Actually, there is another way to solve this equation, something that we have already discussed, something that the last time we mentioned, that if the coefficient of the leading term is 1, you can try to see if you can factor it. In this case, it is possible to factor it. If you think about it, x and x, what are the two numbers that you multiply to get 1, and if you add them together, you will get -2. Those numbers are -1 and -1. If you multiply them together, you will get +1. If you add them, you'll get -2. So either this is 0 or the other parentheses is 0, since it's a product of two numbers. X minus 1 is 0, or x minus 1 is 0. They both give you the same solution. They both give you x equal to 1 and x equal to 1. Same result that we had here. So in this case, you could have factored it. How about this example? Let's say, what is A, what is B, what is C? This is an important case that you should be careful. If you look at the equation, it's not in the quadratic standard form. So standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. So move everything to one side. I'm going to subtract the 2 from both sides. Sorry. Choose the right color. I'm going to add the 2 to both sides to get rid of this 2 on the right hand side. So I'll get 2x squared minus x plus 2 equal to 0. Normally they say write in descending order. That means write it from the highest degree to the smallest one. X squared, x to the power 1, and the last one does not have any x, so it is x to the power 0. But if you do this, now you can see that a is 2, b is -1, coefficient of x, and c is 2. You can use the quadratic formula. What is x? X equals minus b, so 1 plus or minus square root of b squared, which is 1, minus 4 times 2 times 2. That is 16. Divide by 2 times 2. And you can simplify it. 1 plus or minus square root of -15 divide by 4. So what are the x values? Either x is 1 plus square root of -15 divided by 2, or x equals 1 minus square root of -15 divided by 2. Do not cancel out the negative signs together. It's not possible to do that. But we learned that if you have negative number underneath the square root, you can write it as complex value, imaginary number. So you can write it as 1 minus I square root of 15 divided by 2. And the other one you can write it as the top one is plus 1 minus I square root of 15 over 2. These are the two solutions to our equation. What is important to notice is there are 3 cases when you deal with solving quadratic equation. If you look at the first case, what we got underneath the square root was a positive number 17. In the second example, what we got underneath the square root of 4 minus 4, which was 0. So we got 0 underneath the square root. And in the very last example, we got square root of negative number. We got a negative number underneath the square root. This value underneath the square root tells you about some information about the solution. In the first one, we got 2 solutions, totally different numbers. Maybe decimal values, but they're going to be totally different. In the second case, we got 1 repeated solution, x equal to 1 in both cases, just because it was 0 underneath the square root. And the last one, we got 2 solutions. If you look at them, they're conjugate of each other. They're exactly the same values. Right here, these 2 are exactly the same values in terms of the real value, but the complex part are the opposite. So they're conjugate of each other, and they're both complex values. So what can I say is using the discriminant, which is what is underneath the square root. So the discriminant is basically b squared minus 4ac. This is what is underneath the square root in the quadratic formula is minus b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. This underneath the square root tells you some information about the solution that you're gonna get. If that b squared minus 4ac, if it's a positive number, which means if it's greater than 0, then I can say I have two real solutions. Two real solutions. This is what you should expect, because the square root gives you a real number. In the first example, the square root gave us square root of 17. It was a number. Plus 3 is still a real number. Divided by 4 is still a real number. And you will get two real solutions. If it was 0, if b squared minus 4ac, if it was 0, then, like the second example, we have one repeated solution. So one repeated, say, one real solution. It's a repeated solution, but it's a real value. Sometimes they consider two solutions, but it's a one repeated. Okay, so here, if it is a negative value, if the discriminant, which is b minus 4ac, if it is negative value, then we have two complex solutions. And these complex solutions turn to be conjugate of each other. This is important, the fact that they're conjugate, for factoring polynomials later on if you know one of the complex solutions. So I'm going to use this discriminant to discuss how the solutions are going to look like without finding out the exact values. So let's try an example. Say an example. Sorry. They're given something like 2x squared minus 5x minus 3 equal to 0. Without solving it, can you tell me how many solutions and what type of solutions do you expect? And are they real or complex? Real or complex? You can find out the exact value of the solutions, but we don't want to find the exact value. We just want to discuss it. There may be two solutions. There may be one solution. It could be complex or real values. So let's find out what is the discriminant. So I want to find out b squared minus 4ac. I want to find out the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, which is b is -5. Sorry, a is 2, b is -5, and c is -3. So you would get -5 squared, which is 25, minus 4 times 2 times -3. If you add these numbers together, what you get is a positive number. We do not really care about the value of the number. It's just the fact that it's a positive number. If I have a positive number underneath the square root, it's a real value. It doesn't give you a complex value. So what do I expect? I expect two real solutions. This is the first case, square root of 17 that we got. Let's try another example. I'm going to do 2x squared minus 3x plus 5. How about that? Equal to 0. Again, you can find out the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, which is 9 minus 4 times 2 times 5. This is 9 minus 20, 40. 9 minus 40 is -31. So it is it's a negative value. So if the discriminant is negative, what can I say is two complex solutions. This is what you have. If the discriminant is 0, it tells you something about the equation as well. But let's x squared minus, let's say 3x, let's change that to 6x is easier, minus 6x plus 9 equal to 0. Calculate this one. Discriminant b squared minus 4ac, negative 6 squared, 36, minus 4 times 9 times 1, a is 1. It gives you 36 minus 36 is 0. So this tells me that there is only one real solution. This kind of gives you an information about the equation as well. That means this equation could be factored into something like x minus 3 squared. Because there are two numbers that you can multiply by itself. It's negative 3 and negative 3. You can think about it as x minus 3 equal to 0. Negative 3 times negative 3 gives you positive 9. Negative 3 minus negative 3 is negative 6. We will discuss that at some point, but it's just the discriminant will give you enough information that what type of solution do you expect. Okay, let's stop here.